We are with Chodesh, everybody, in a good Yom Tov. Special day today. Pardon me not to start with the story, so the Chodesh Kislev. I'll tell a story. Tafshin Nun Dalet, no, Tafshin Nun Beis, I think it was. I believe Tafshin Nun Beis. I was in 770 by the Chodesh Kislev by Fabrengen. I remember where I was standing. As soon as I walk in, left, right, where the women's section starts, like right under there. I was sitting there at the Fabrengen with four other friends, three or four other friends. And I said to myself, I have to make a flota to give the Rebbe a gift for the special day. Thank Hashem for the miracle, for giving us the Rebbe. So I made a flota that it will arrange a mitzvah thing in Boston, which was my hometown city, over Hanukkah, which would have been, 25 days later, right? 3.5 weeks later. So I made a chlota in public with my friends so that it should have an achida, should really take roots. At that time, many years back, Afternoon Days, we're talking about, now we're talking about 34 years ago. To rent the mitzvah tank every day would cost $100 a day. Today it's a lot more. This is days. And I'd grown up in Boston, and it bothered me that the Lubavitch wasn't like as developed as it could have been. I wanted to do this anyway, so I raised the money. Family members gave me money, and I had some money. I had some nice from camp. I raised most of the money. I had $300, and I wasn't really worried about the other 100. It's going to come. But when I got to the rental office, the mitzvah tank, the mobile home office, I said, I want you to give me the biggest mobile home you have. They gave me a 29-footer at last time. So I wanted to go with a storm with a real bang. And then we had to plan out our route. We had 4 days to go: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Because the Russian were going to go home for Shabbos. I stayed for Shabbos with my parents. So I decided that we're going to go to Brandeis University as our first stop. Why? Because when my father was a college student, he came to me for that. But I came to Lubavitch, and he was going to finish up his scientific studies because the Rebbe told him to do more for Yiddishkeit. That's the initials after his name. My father said to the Rebbe, maybe I should go to Brandeis University. At that time, my father was studying in Penn State. So the Rebbe said a Jewish university can go one of two ways. And they didn't go the right way. So I said to myself, if the Rebbe told my father not to study in Brandeis University back then, so then when it comes to Mitzvahim and Mitzvah Tank, that's the first place I have to go. We pulled up to Brandeis University with three other friends, with four of us, with the music blaring, like classic Chabad style. No permits, no asking permission. Bam! Right in the center of the campus. We've arrived. The students were very delighted to see us. And then two of my friends went inside the campus itself, the professors, and they didn't come out. I thought they got detained. I didn't know what happened to them. Turns out they came out 2-3 hours later. And then I said to them, so I peppered them with questions. What happened? I said, well, one of the professors said to us, there's you guys from Chabad? I said, yeah. Because we had a meeting amongst the faculty members to decide whether or not it'd be advantageous to have Chabad come on campus for Hanukkah, whether or not, and we voted that we would like Chabad to come. So he understood that's why Chabad. I didn't know anything about this vote. We didn't know anything about it. But the Abish appears about the Abish temple here. Then towards the end of our visit, so then the other days we went to other towns. And then the last day that I was there, we were on Harvard Street, which is like the Keystone Avenue of Brookline. For those of you who are familiar with the area, very Jewish area. I'm parking there's the tank, and I get out and I see this middle-aged woman who's staring at the big sign that says Mitzvah Mitzvah. The people on the go. She's fixated. I could see that she's entranced. She's really taken by it. So I approached her. I said, she's Jewish. She said she's Jewish. Then she asked the Chabad rabbi a question she never asked the rabbi. He said, Rabbi, do you know of a good charity that I can donate to? She's just coming from the hospital. Her mother was, covering her some sort of, she has some kind of medical issue. She wants to give some kind of charity I could recommend for her to give. in merit of her mother. So I said, look, what we're doing here is a non-profit enterprise. We're not doing this for profit. We're here to help the people. And I think it's a very good cause. At that time, I already had $340. I just need another $60 to finish it. And I wasn't worried. I know the Abishah said she takes $60 out of her purse, puts it right into the push gift. But whatever doesn't mean I'm deaf. Then I had another story, which is the icing on the cake. On Friday, so my friends went home that Thursday night. So Friday, I needed a suit. I needed to buy a new suit. Then in Boston, there's a store called Filing Innovation. I don't know if it's still around. It was around those days. My mother, I thought the memory was European. She had a fine taste. She taught me how to shop, how to find something, a good quality piece of clothing, and she would, but this store had things on sale. Like if it wouldn't sell, it would go down 25%. So she was, I don't know, she loved to shop. Men don't like shopping. I'd go there like something, I'd go get it. She would love to go there and whatever. That's a whole other story. But so I needed a suit. But I'm like, okay, I just go like a beeline, straight to the subway, straight there, go to the store, straight to the rack, and I go there literally, and I find there's a suit exactly my size, 75% off. And it was a dark color, it was color, everything. So the Abishah takes care of everything, like you do what you have to do. Anyway, so I saw a lot of hugs from Hashem. That was just that happened 34 years ago. There's more of that. So we go up till that ribbon. We make a keli, so all kinds of beautiful brachos. Anyway, all these cities that we visited, by the way, 34 years ago now, Shluchim, there is a Shliach and Brandeis today, and the Shluchim all over. Hashem. Okay. Anyway, so that's our story. That's the opener. Now we have to get into halacha. We'll have to switch the segue. So we were talking, we're on page Nun Beis, we're starting a new subject. We were talking about this is a preface to a series of rabbinic prohibition that the rabbis enacted in order to safeguard the maintenance of Jewish life. The main reason why the rabbis made these prohibitions is in order to prevent intermarriage. Intermarriage is the greatest destructive force of Jewish life. It's also destructive to the non-Jewish nation because the non-Jews are not able to fulfill their mandate. So the Chachamim, the rabbis enacted certain laws that govern the foods we bake, the foods we cook. Milk that's milk for the sake of drinking, it's called Yisrael, and also Vinas Yisrael, cheese that's made with the Jews' involvement. And there are other laws also with regards to wine, etc. So there's a general theme regarding these laws is they're enacted in order to prevent intermarriage because we're going to mingle with the non-Jews in such a way in a social setting with food. So it breaks down the barrier, it brings to a certain sense of emotional intimacy, a closeness, which could lead to intermarriage, which is a problem. So the Chachamim said that we have to establish certain parameters. They didn't say you're not allowed to go out and have lunch with a non-Jewish friend or colleagues. They didn't say that. They said there's certain parameters in which you have to follow in order to give us that safeguard, that reminder. And when it comes to a rabbinic prohibition, we have a cloud, we have a general rule, which is known as Hey Mama V'Hei Mama, which in English translates as the same rabbi that said the following things are prohibited, following things are permissible. The mashal I gave last week was when you go out to buy insurance and you buy a policy, so they'll say the following things are included in the policy, the following things are exclusion, right? Acts of God, whatever it is, God forbid national catastrophe, should never happen. The things that are excluded. So they set a framework, they set parameters. Okay, so did we finish this page? I don't remember last week where we're up to. Does anyone have no? Okay, thank you. Okay, so just bring it back in. So we're up to page Nun Gimel actually, in the middle of the preface. So Hashem made it interesting the nature of the non-Jews that they can't really tolerate, so to speak, when we get too close with them because they feel it's not comfortable for them because it's not the way they're made. It's not the way we're made. They feel like something's not matching. There's many stories of people that weren't religious, and the non-Jewish boyfriend or girlfriend made them religious. Like told them they'll put on tefillin, because really Hashem planted that each one of us have a certain God-given mandate and a shlichus. The non-Jews also have a shlichus. And when you start to mess with the cosmic design, then it creates problems. It feels unnatural, it feels wrong. We read schon am Tag im Bestorben haben, weiß ich mit dem Machikim Yisrael Mipneim, Dugmas Mashkot Vazev, es Machatem, Shom Leibecho, Ein Kaina. Like you offer for sale to there's other people, and there's no buyers. In other words, they say it's not for us. Matthias zu Kalal Yisrael Mitam Lumeit, Ein Lakim Ba'el Meintev Asev Mishum Shein Lebi Yotzech Mutachako, because the world does not need this. The world needs that the Jews should be what they call Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kodesh, should be a light unto the nation. So when the Jews are living pure, for their purpose, the non-Jew feels, oh, I can actually benefit. I can. I think I told this story last week. The Rebbe told my father, Rav Shalom, that he should be very careful to give his boss an honest place work. He worked in industry, and he was accosted with a beard, and he was working everybody knew that he was Jewish. And a lot of non-Jewish people, particularly like young men, used to come to my father for advice in life about their relationships with their girlfriends, or my father would advise them to try and settle down, to have a real life, not just live such a lifestyle. But the point I'm saying is that they recognized, they saw my father was a Jew, they recognized Torah, recognized Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kodesh, and they wanted to be able to benefit from it, because that's the way Hashem designed it. So when we're in our element, when we're in our lane, so to speak, things flow. Okay, that's all the same point. Now, let's skip to Halacha Zayin. Halacha Zayin is very interesting. It talks about the power of food. We spoke about this last time. The Chabad setting, those people say, oh, what the rabbi spoke about or the Rebbe said didn't really make such an impression on me, but the Shabbos meal and the Kinderlach and the singing and the family bond, that's already a whole nother level. That's there's a certain draw there. You can't even put your finger on it. The beginning of people connecting with each other, you sit down and you have a nice meal together. The Meishach of Libam, it draws the heart, and it can bring to this atmosphere. So therefore, Chachamim said, specifically with regards to food, we need to put in these safeguards. And that's also, I mentioned this very last week, there was a thing of the young Israel rabbi who came thinking of an initiative to help curb the tide of anti-Semitism on the university campuses. He said to the Rebbe, he's going to have speakers come and try to inspire the students. The Rebbe said, establish kosher cafeteria. Jewish boys and Jewish girls will be able to eat together, they can meet each other, and hopefully marry each other. And also, it's a time when people get closer, so it's the right environment. And do it under the circumstances of exciting. Okay, that's just a haftamah, that's a preface. And now we're going to learn the laws of Pas. It's page Nun Daled, and now I'm going to give you a story about Pas. I can't help it, it's come to mind. When the Rebbe lived in Paris, the Rebbe used to walk a certain distance, I don't know, I think a considerable distance, every morning to light the fire of an oven in a bakery, their local bakery, to make it pastor slow. The story with the Frierdiker Rebbe. I heard this from Rabbi Shvei, the one that Rabbanim Lubavitch passed away about 5.5 years ago. He was a very, very wonderful person. He told me the following story. It happened obviously before I was born. It happened in the 1940s. He said that there were like 2 commercial bakeries that had a shade in those days. Kashrut wasn't developed the way it is today. And one of them was owned by a Jewish fellow. He may have been a religious fellow, but the workers were Jewish people. They weren't religious after the war. Such a broken generation of people trying to rebuild their lives. So we know that in the morning, before we do anything, we wash Negev. We have to wash our hands, because it says that when we go to sleep at night, when the Shama goes upstairs, so there's nothing funny. There's like a vacuum. So it leaves a ruach tumah, spirit of impurity upon ourselves, and we wash the Negev to wash it from spirit of impurity. So one of the people asked the Frierdiker Rebbe the following question. He said, maybe we're better off eating non-pasif soul bread that's baked by non-Jews. So for the non-Jews, they don't have the nefesh case, the gavi soul that goes up. They're designed differently. So they don't have this issue of the ruach tumah. Maybe we're better off eating the non-pasif soul bread that doesn't have this issue of ruach tumah, because the workers are not washing negevatsa because they weren't religious workers. And instead of eating the Pas Yisrael bread, so the Rebbe gave a fascinating response. He said, here you're worried about ruach tumah, that pas palta is tumah alain. Pas palta is tumah itself, means spiritually. Luckily, it's a lot, but spiritually. And there's a verse from, it says in the writings of Arizal. The Tal writes, the student of Arizal, he writes that we're going to learn soon that the reason why the rabbis have a leniency with regards to bread that was baked by a non-Jew without a Jew's involvement, that they're permissible, because we need bread to survive, right? We can live on bread alone. We have in Pirkei Avos, bread and water. So without this sustenance, we can't survive. It's basic sustenance. We need it. So the Arizal takes that very same teaching and learns it as a reason to be machmer, to be stringent. He takes the same teaching and learns it with chumrah for astringency. He says, because the bread is our basic sustenance, we want to be all the more careful to make sure it's coming from a holy source. But spiritually, it's very, very powerful. And I'll tell you one more story, and then hopefully I'll close the pipeline of stories for now. At least I'll get the draw. But you know this stuff. You know, I was in camp when I was probably 20 years old. They told me this Hasidim don't chabren. Their whole life is a chabren. Wherever you go, it's a chabren. So it's what we're in class, it's a chabren, and it's all part of life. So anyway, so this other story was as follows. There was a Rav who was giving a hechsher in a bakery, and he didn't want to let him make a Pas Yisrael. I don't know why the owners didn't want to let him do that. In those days, the fire was an open flame fire, like, it was a real fire. So in order to make a Pas Yisrael, we're going to learn to now. Luckily, a Jew just throws in a twig or light the fire, but even just a small contribution of heat, it suffices. So the Rav was a very clever man. He used to go in smoking a cigar that he lit. He'd go in, and then when he got to the part of the bakery by the oven, he was just throwing the cigar like, okay, I'm done smoking. I'm not smoking anymore. But really, what he was doing was, he smoked the cigar so it should be a Jewish fire. And by throwing it into the flame, he's now he's giving what's called a Yad Yisrael, a Jew's involvement in the baking, which makes it Pas Yisrael. Mikam Papi Yisrael. Now I'm going to tell you another story. See, it happens. There's another story. There's a sefer, it's a fantastic sefer. This is a little bit off topic, so I'm sorry. Can't help it. There's a sefer called Yiddish Chachmas Apichas, Jewish Wit and Wisdom. It's a collection of stories from the Gemara, from the Achreinim, from the Greek Torah scholars. It was written by a Yid. His name was Oye Chaim Kalbach. He was the older brother of Shlomo Kalbach, the singer. Very great Torah scholar, very, very smart man. Anyway, so he wrote, he compiled it. I don't even know if it's in print. I read it once, and I was very big. I read it, I think, cover the cover of it. Anyway, there's a few very geschmacked stories. I think the stories in that sefer. There was the Rabbi Yehuda lived in times from a tzedek. He was like a rav then, and his Enikov came to see him. And he was a very clever man. He was sitting, I think he lived in Prague. He was in an apartment on the first floor of the building where he lived, and a bandit came. And so Rabbi, a troublemaker came and said to him, I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna steal from him. I hurt him unless you show me some kind of trick. Because if you show me that you could jump down from the third floor to the first floor without getting injured, I'll leave you alone. So the Rav said to the bandit, I could show you an even bigger trick. I could jump from the first floor to the third floor. The bandit's like, really? So he leaves, and then he saves his life, he goes out. So he outsmarted him, for the sake of you're allowed to do that. Anyway, there's a lot of stories. I'm going to stop around my head. Okay. By the way, there's another story with the Rabbi Yehuda when he was becoming Rav. Fascinating story. This is a really fascinating one. So it's an own thing that when a Rav is asked the Shaila, he has the Shmai. Nobody knows everything. As you know, so Hashem, he does his work with dedication and bittul to Hashem, and he's sincere about his work. Hashem gives him the divine inspiration to know what to do. So he was there, and he had what's called a problem, and he was thinking of hiring him as the Rav of the city. And someone asked him a question, and he didn't know the answer. He says to the person, it's not a real question. The person says, you're right, how'd you know? He says, because for the real question, I would have known what to do. But yes, you have to Dishmaya. You have divine inspiration. You didn't have any inspiration that you knew that's not a real question. Okay. Anyway, back to our subject. Page Nun Dalid, Perek Shlishi, Hilchot Pasakim, the laws of Pasakim. Oh, this is something else I have to say. It's a stickle story that's not much connected. Rabbi Yaslavsky, who's a senior Lubavitcher Rav in Nachlas HaChabad, okay, no, I think Nachlas HaChabad. He told me the story. When he was a young married fellow, the Rebbe told him to become Rav over there. The Rebbe gave him certain instructions. And the Rebbe said to him the following words. The Sheni Azov, the Rebbe's holy words, the Rebbe said, Chasidim zenenzeye makbid is Chas Yisrael and Kol Yisrael. Chasidim are very, very careful about Chas Yisrael and Kol Yisrael. The precious things in the hallmarks of Chasidim. Shloisha devarim asom Chazal to the Lafikenim and Agim. Three things that Chazal favored us in order that we should be each nation should be to themselves, to be true to their mandate. So we shouldn't come to intermarriage. Same shemen the controlling oil from an by the way, that particular prohibition did not take root in Jewish law. It's brought down in the Mishnah and the Gemara, but didn't actually take root because it wasn't accepted by the communities at the time. Pitom, the bread baked by an the food cooked. So these three prohibitions, these three enactments were not accepted in the Jewish communities all equally. There was different levels of acceptance at the time. In order for them to take on the strength of law, they had to be accepted by the community, take root, right? Just like when you plant something, if it takes root, then it's going to stay. The Gzeira against oil was the Gzeira that wasn't accepted by most Jewish people. Communities, but it was a type of prohibition. So most people couldn't bear with it. They wouldn't have no oil. Without oil, what are they going to do? They cook. I don't know. Not a problem. Therefore, the bezin that came after the original bezin, they said it's permissible. Today it's permissible to consume oil from an achli. As long as it's kosher, obviously, which is why it has to have a hechsher. But it doesn't have to be oil that was made by a Jew per se. Not only is it permissible, you now want to be stringent because then they're going against the bezdin that permitted it. Then we have to follow that. The prohibition against bread baked by a non-Jew was not accepted unanimously amongst all Jewish communities. Therefore, there's some inherent leniencies, as we're going to explain further on in our studies. However, the prohibition against foods cooked by a non-Jew, it was accepted by most Jewish communities, but it's in full force. So now we're going to study, I'll take the question in a moment, we're going to study about Pasakim. We should just point out, even though the term we use, that bread baked by a non-Jew, Akum Bishul Akum, a food cooked by a non-Jew, which means Akum is the acronym for Ovid Yichov Mazos, somebody who worships the stars and the constellation. What happens if you have a non-Jew who doesn't worship the stars and the constellation? They're not worshiping idols. What about that? Even the bread from a non-Jew who doesn't serve a foreign entity, so also because of Pasakim, it's just a general term. Anytime it says the word Akum, it refers to any non-Jew because they, in order to be able to keep the nations true to their own purpose, each one to their own purpose, and it's complementary to both nations. It's who you are. It is who you are. Yes.
And what these rules was like accepted, like these rules were accepted, like
In terms of the Mishnah, that's the Mishnah of the Gemara. Yes, that's what it's about. The Mishnah of the Gemara. Okay. Now, what's fascinating is that in Halacha Beis, it talks about the difference between the structure of Pasakim and Bishul Akum. Now, I'm a little bit like self-conscious about going in public because everyone's been to my house knows that when it comes to artistic talent, Hashem blessed my wife and my children actually. I was taking a long nap and it just wasn't available when Hashem gave it out. So I'll try to write something on. Well, but basically I'm going to give you a rough sketch. You know what? I'll give you a rough sketch. Basically, you know, here on top we said that the reason why the rabbis prohibited something on Bishul Akum primarily was in order to be a safeguard against intermarriage. That's the primary reason. But Bishul Akum is a secondary reason, which is we're going to learn about in our next talk. Maybe the person who's going to cook the food would mix in some non-permissible ingredients into the mix because they're not too close. They don't necessarily know, but they're not going to be careful about it. But the primary reason is that the safeguard against intermarriage. That primary reason is equal, applies both to Path and Bishul. So think of it like as the upper banner policy is equal to both. The details of what's prohibited with regards to Path and what's prohibited regarding Bishul differ because the structure of Bishul and Path are different. Because Path, Halacha defines Path as anything made from the 5 grains, turned into a flour substance and made into like a dough. For example, anything made from wheat, oats, stuff, rye, or barley that's turned into a flour, substance and made into a dough. You can make a biscuit, a cookie, a challah roll, baguette, a stuffed sandwich, sandwich, whatever you like. Yes, that's all Path. But somebody, let's say, took the 5 grains and cooked them and made macaroni. Even though it's made from the 5 grains, since it wasn't put together as a dough and baked, the macaroni is in the category of Bishul because of the way it's prepared. So by Path, we say that anything made from the 5 grains, in the way as it's prescribed, as spinach or flour, those substances and baked, would be Path. And we said that halachically, Path is very big by a non-Jewish baker in a place you can't get Path Yisrael is available. We'll learn about that. But the Hasidim are strict only to have Path Yisrael. So with regards to Path, there's a component about it where there's an inherent leniency that is, if a person lives in a place so they can't get Path Yisrael, Path culture is halachically permissible, even though Hasidim are stringent. With regards to Bishul Akum, there's something that needs to be Bishul Yisrael we're going to learn about. I just wanted to just make it clear to see the difference. Something that has to be Bishul Yisrael. Let's say, for example, you have a steak. Right? So a steak has to be cooked, you can't eat it raw. So the principles governing Bishul Akum are that any food that's not edible in its raw state, so it's food from, let's say, carrots and apples, which are edible raw, right? The apples and carrots are not doing a lot of cook them because if they're edible raw, and therefore there's no wow effect, no feeling of indebtedness. Instead of eating it the way it was, I have to be a bunny rabbit. I can eat carrots all day, right? So, but it comes to meat, you cannot eat it raw. So the only way to cook it, to eat it is by cooking it and making it into a prepared dish. So there's a very strong feeling of indebtedness. And now who does that will feel like, oh, thank you so much. We're worried it's going to create an improper relationship. So there, anything that's forbidden, a Bishul Akum, we don't say, oh, the person's in a place where they can't get Bishul Yisrael food. They're allowed to have Bishul Akum. No, Bishul Akum is prohibited. In that regard, stricter than Path. But Bishul Akum has another side to it, which is more lenient than Path. Any food that's not something that you would serve at a king's table, let's say, for example, popcorn. It's actually it's a very cheap food. You wouldn't serve it at a fancy event. That does not have to be Bishul Yisrael because it's not considered to be of certain quality. Yes? And the same would be when it comes to carrots and apples. Even though carrots could be very royal, make timid, but because the carrots are edible raw, they don't have to be made Bishul Yisrael. So it has in the principle, in the substrate of Bishul Akum, you have inherent leniency and inherent stringency, and by Path, you have inherent stringency and inherent leniency. I just want to point this out so we understand clearly that the banner on top is the reason for the prohibition is the same, that did marriage, but the details of what's prohibited, what's permissible, and either one of the groups are different. Hope that's good without my drawing. Okay. When I was a kid, my handwriting is not the greatest. My father thought I'd grow up to be a doctor because nobody could read my handwriting. Okay, halacha base. The difference between Path Akum and Bishul Akum, yesh lo dat, yakshe is a Path Akum, dema is a Bishul Akum, even though the prohibition against Path Akum and Bishul Akum It's similar to Bishul Akum. Bishnei Meichol Nochim Asurim, because they're both prohibited foods. Ela Shezev Pas Zev Nafsha, but this is talking about bread, it's talking about cooked food. They have differences in the substrates, and they each one have a stringency and a leniency that the other does not have. Okay? They only prohibited Bishul Akum if this food is of a royal nature. You serve it at a fancy event. The type of food that you wouldn't eat raw. Which is within Bishul Akum, as you explain the fourth paragraph in Bishul Akum. But bread baked by a non-Jew is also, even though it's not kosher bread. The rabbi said anything that's called bread is also, even though it wouldn't be served at a king's table. So there's a certain part of Pas Akum that's more strict than Bishul Akum. So too will be in the reverse. There's a leniency. Like Pas Akum Sheikh, Kelu Harbi Bisa Pas Akum. The rabbis were very lenient with regards to Pas Akum. The prohibition of Pas Akum was not accepted unanimously in all Jewish communities alike, and therefore it did not take on the full strength of law. They said you're allowed to have bread from a non-Jewish baker in a place where Pas Yisrael is unavailable. Halachically, even though it's not binding. The prohibition of Bishul Akum was accepted in all places, set forth in all places. Therefore, the rabbi did not make a difference between Bishul Bal Habayis, privately cooked food, or food cooked by a caterer. No, they said it's both prohibited. By Pas Bal Habayis is also worse, it's more strict because we're more concerned about a relationship developing. When it comes to a person doing it for business, they're not interested in being your friend. They just want to make money. They want to say hello to the customer, but they're not trying to develop a relationship. When it comes to a social setting, as a neighbor or just someone on a personal level, is much more of a risk. So in the most circumstances, possible advice is also. We're going to explain these details at the right time. Anytime it mentions the heter of Pas Akum Bishul Akum, as long as you know for sure there's no prohibited substances in these bread, which could happen, by the way. It's unlikely, by the way, there's very little lard in America, used in America. It used to be much more prevalent. Lard is, of course, straight, it's forbidden fat, but we still have seen it occasionally. I was in a bakery several years ago that used lard. It can happen. It's not common. As long as you haven't been able to ascertain, there's no Easter. Some should not eat pasnochi b'shul kiderech ha'ifim le'ovim akiv masurim v'tichvim pashven. Because people would mix an ingredient that could be not kosher and problematic. Okay, any questions? Yes, you had a question. No, they answered the question. Okay. Yes. Yes. Without the Yisrael, right? So that's something we can talk about. We're going to study about it more at length in the next subject, but I want to make sure that you're not going to go hungry. I'll answer the question. So, potato chips are from the 4 basic food groups of the American diet, right?
Yeah.
And your snack food is that category. You should have like a warning sign on it that fixes. There's one you should know. So having Bishul Yisrael potato chips is a machlokes whether it's required or not. But Moshe Feinstein was stringent about it. He held up he didn't. It's a field. Some people are lean. The reason why they're lean is because just that we say that foods have to be made Bishul Yisrael. It's a kind of type of food that's not edible raw. Potato is not edible raw. So because it's originating from a potato, it's not edible raw, so therefore it has to be Bishul Yisrael, according to that way of thinking. But according to another reasoning would be the final appearance of the product is not something you would serve at a king's table. You don't serve potato chips at a king's table at a fancy, let's say a fancy wedding or a fancy event. It's considered to be not respectful, not appropriate. So because it doesn't have that worthiness, it would be not a shulchan malachin, and therefore wouldn't require Bishul Yisrael, according to that way of thinking. In practice, what should we do? If we live in a place where the Bishul Yisrael potato chips are available to us, okay, so then why not be machmir? It's appropriate. you're living in a place out of a, established Jewish community, there are no Bishul Akum dealerships around. One has who to rely upon if they want to be lenient. Still, if someone was going to be strict, they should be praised. And that's just so. Having said that, I want to point something else out. You can talk about this for hours, but you have all these new products out there, like in the snack family, in fact, I didn't have in the whole, and I was a kid at least. They have these top snacks. Like you'll have veggie straws, they're made from like flour, and then they pop them into certain shapes. They have these other things that are like fluffy, hot things. That process is not a traditional baking process or cooking process, and will be permissible for that reason. So that's much more lenient than a potato chip. And a corn chip is also more lenient than a potato chip, but many of on hold, not all. And corn in America is not something that's considered also from a muffin, because it's the cheapest feedstock. It's always a lot of sweeteners, and it's the cheapest feedstock. So in other countries, corn is more kosher, like in Eretz Yisrael, I think also in Mexico it's more kosher. But in America, you don't really see, it's not too common to see corn. And corn could also be edible raw a little bit. So it's a little bit more lenient than a potato. Still somewhat strict in saying, but I'm just mentioning that in terms of how we scale this and how we actually diagnose it, so to speak. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to finish one more story. In the top of the Rosh Gimel, we have to bring us a Rosh Chodesh Kislev to finish a month. And have to be truthful to it. Does see this. When I was a butler in Marstown, if ever gave a hater, I think it's a tough one day. I remember correctly. No, it was not Monday. I remember now. No, it may have been on days. On the days I was already saying. I think it was tough in no. I don't know, one of those years, like 19. From like 1990, 91, one of those years, that ever gave a hater that they should bring every night of Kislev. So the Buckman was like, yeah, great, action with the Shmat. So Dan Helga knew that he didn't want to disturb and stay there, like he's going to Fabrang for 1 o'clock every morning, there'll be no Seder Fatus in the morning. So we Fabrang from 9:30 to 11, just so 11:30 you get to sleep, you have a normal sleep. But I remember it was so geschmack that the whole month was Yom Tov. I felt like the whole month was Shabbos. Says the Klal Hamakofas Shabbos. The whole month was Yom Tov because we were before we had time to even process the Fabrengen, to fully process. We were ready for Fabrengen again. We were totally in rapid Fabrengen. It was so geschmack. Anyway, so there was a. I'll tell you a story. So there's one more stuff to tell you. There's a Yid who there was a Yid, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Kellerman. He was a Rav in West Hempstead, in the largest shul in that area. He had about 800 families in the shul. He was a tremendous Torah scholar, a great Rav, and a very humble person. He wouldn't call himself rabbi. He didn't even know who he was. He was an amazing human being. He was 9 generations from the Baal Shem Tov. Known for Baal Shem Tov years. He loved that Rebbe. He learned the Sifis. He wasn't an official about it, though he was a real about it, like in his heart. Anyway, so he told me, when he was at age 17, he unfortunately had an accident. He was walking to Shul, and a pickup truck hit him. And it was terrible. He flew like 35 feet, and he lost consciousness. And then an African-American woman, God bless her, found him in the street. But she didn't know who he was. So she reached in his pocket, found his wallet, he got his identification, called Tola, whatever, called 911. His life was saved. And Baruch Hashem, his brain was turning up. His brain was fine. Go on here. I don't know. Can someone turn this off? Okay, so his brain was fine, but his body was ravaged. He couldn't walk. He's a very positive person. It took him a whole year to learn how to walk, and even then he had to walk with a walker. So I called him up a few months after the accident. He was in like a rehab. I wanted to give him chizuk. I was very close to him. He knew my father. We were involved in kashrut together. said, "Oh, kill him, or it's Chodesh." I said, "We have to bring with me on the phone." I told him the following story. I said, when I was in yeshiva, there were inmates that came to visit. I spent like 10 days in the yeshiva. They were not dangerous people. People that had just, what do you call blue collar? Not blue collar is considered non-dangerous. White collar crime. What was it? Anyway, they spent 10 days in the yeshiva, and they had a Gavai party for them. And they got up, and one of them said, you gave me something that I can, they'll keep me free even in prison. What did he say? He says, in prison, they take away our physical freedom. But you gave me spiritual freedom by learning Torah and serving God. He says, I could take that anywhere. No one can take that away from me. I said to Rabbi Hanoka, I said, not teaching, I learned that now you're physically limited because it's hard for you to walk. I said, we're going to fire up your neshama with chassidus. I said, you're unlimited. You'll be able to be on fire. And he loved it. Have a good job. It's a good favor.